screaming, we always holler back to 'em.
I appreciate, first of all, the opportunity to speak here tonight. Thank you, Bill, for wherever Bill just ran off. There you are. Thank you for the invitation and for hunting me down and making sure that we got this put together. I see Representative Ben Smalls just walked in from Auburn, who's a good man and good friend. Good to see you, Ben. I think it's safe to say that no matter what each of us believes are the solutions to our nation's problems, and they are many, and they are of great concern, I know, to everyone here tonight, we can all agree it's crucial to our nation's future that these problems be solved, that they be solved soon, and that the current group in Washington isn't likely to provide us any of those solutions. That's not a condemnation of everyone in Washington. There are some good people out there trying hard. It's just the reality of the situation we're facing. In other words, it's up to the states and the citizens of this country to solve the problems before it's too late. We are absolutely on our own. So with that happy thought, I thought I'd start out our talk tonight with a little attempt at humor. I think it's important to try to lighten the atmosphere a little bit. So I'm going to share a story with you, and as you'll be able to immediately tell, it's based upon a true story. So here it goes. Dick Cheney, Al Gore, and Joe Biden are all traveling together in a small Central American nation when they are arrested and accused of spying. A kangaroo court is immediately assembled. They are tried and convicted and sentenced to death by firing squad. The first to go is Dick Cheney. They line him up against the wall. The soldiers take their places. The drums roll. But just at the moment of truth, Cheney yells out, "Earthquake!" Well, all kinds of chaos and huge commotion ensues. And in that confusion, Cheney leaps over the wall and runs to safety. Next is Al Gore. Al Gore is the next person up. Same process. He's lined up against the wall. The soldiers take their places. But just at the key moment, Gore yells, "Tornado!" And again, confusion and chaos occurs, and Gore takes advantage by leaping over the wall and running to his freedom. Well, now, Joe Biden's been taking all this in, and he says, "Okay, I get it. All I have to do is wait until the crucial moment, yell that some natural disaster is about to occur, and then I'll run to my freedom." So they line Biden up against the wall. The drums roll. The soldiers take their place. Ready, aim, and at that crucial moment, Biden yells, "Fire!" Somehow it's got to be true, right? Oh, I love Joe Biden. Now tonight, as you know, we're here to discuss an Article 5 Convention of the States. I've been involved in this for about a year now, but for a long time, as a leader, and before that, just as a member of the Senate, I've been increasingly frustrated by the steady, constant erosion of states' rights. And for me, the Obamacare Supreme Court decision was really the tipping point. So I looked around, wondering what it was we could do as a state legislature, and I revisited the idea of an Article 5 convention. And like many people in the past, I'd previously shied away from the idea because, you know, there was a fear factor that had been built around this idea by many groups over the years. But I kept coming back to it as maybe the only solution, a viable solution anyway, that we could find. So I want to visit a little bit of the history of the process, how it ended up in the Constitution, and why I believe it's the only effective tool available to really salvage our nation's fiscal future. James Madison is the father of the Constitution. He was the author and a key contributor, really, along with Jefferson and others, to its fundamental makeup. And Madison, like other leaders of his time, was first, last, and always concerned about states' rights. It consumed their thoughts in preparing the Constitution. Preserving them was critical because they each feared an all-powerful central government that they had just fought a war to defeat and overcome. They rightly worried that a federal government could, if left unchecked, potentially run roughshod over the states and their independent rights and sovereignty. Does this sound familiar? I think it does. So when it came to amending the Constitution, Madison and the founders provided two separate paths under Article 5 to do it. The first way is the traditional way that we have always done in the United States. Congress proposes an amendment to the Constitution. The amendment must be passed by 2/3 of both houses of Congress, and is then sent to the states. And if 3/4 of the states, or 38 of them, ratify the amendment, then it immediately becomes part of the Constitution. Madison believed that Congress was in a unique position to see where there were defects in the system and to correct them through amendments. This is the process we use to end slavery in this country. It is the process we use to give women the vote. It's the process we use to eliminate prohibition. The second way to amend the Constitution, the topic of tonight's discussion, is through 2/3 of the states, which is 34 of them today, asking Congress to call a convention for proposing amendments. Not a constitutional convention, but a convention for the purpose of proposing amendments. There's a difference there. We can discuss that later if you like. But states would send delegates to the convention, where the convention would ultimately propose those amendments. And once the amendments were established and ratified by the convention, it still then again requires 3/4 of the states, or today 38 states, for that amendment to become part of the Constitution. Madison believed that this was the best and most important way to control an overreaching and out of control federal government. Now think about that just for one more minute. This was the tool Madison and the Founding Fathers expected the states to use to protect themselves and their citizens from an out of control federal government. And in fact, without this provision being inserted into the Constitution, there were several states that would not have ratified the Constitution in the first place, including Massachusetts. But the Article 5 state amendment process has never been used. Never, not once. What the Founding Fathers believed to be the single greatest defense for the states to use against an overreaching federal government has never been used in 226 years. Why is that? Well, quite simply, it's the fear of a runaway convention. The fear that if such a convention were held, all sorts of unintended consequences and worse could occur. Many strongly conservative groups like the Eagle Forum and the John Birch Society have for years opposed a convention for just these reasons, and not without good cause. One of the problems is that there's no specific roadmap in the Constitution for just how you would set up the convention. How many delegates would there be from each state? Could you limit the convention to just a single issue? Critical points. So what was Madison thinking when he put this in the Constitution, he and his fellow founders? Did they make it up out of thin air? And the answer is no, they did not. Madison had a model. There were a number of limited state conventions that had occurred prior to the drafting of the United States Constitution. They were routinely occurring. These state conventions were able to be limited in scope. They were normally 2 delegates from each county, or 1 vote from each state or colony, if that were the case. Used to, and it's oftentimes single issues, used to make important improvements on the constitutions of those now states, former colonies. And most of the founders were used to participating in those. So Madison did have a model, and more importantly, he expected that we be smart enough to figure out the process for ourselves if we didn't have it printed out for us in black and white. Maybe he gave future Americans more credit than we deserve. I don't know. But because the Founding Fathers expected this convention process to be used early and frequently by the states, they did not put out a step-by-step roadmap on how to do it. They all knew how they worked. There's ample history out there for us to follow if we choose. So there's a little background on this. Now fast forward to today, if you will. States' rights have been trampled by the federal government's actions over the past few decades, the latest example being Obamacare. Under the guise of federal taxing authority, this critical concept, taxing authority, it appears the federal government can do virtually anything it wants, and the states are powerless to stop it. So decreed the Supreme Court, in my opinion, Obamacare. The 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution unequivocally states that the federal government is only granted those powers specifically set out in the Constitution, and all else is reserved for the states. But through a series of United States Supreme Court decisions through the years, the federal government has made a mockery of the 10th Amendment. you can't recognize it today. Let me just give you a little simple example of what happens. Just this past year, where Representative Smalls and I were in session, something occurred. Now, every time you pump a gallon of gas here in Indiana, 19 cents goes to the federal government. The tax is built into the price of a gallon of gas. That money is supposed to be rebated to Indiana by the feds, but in fact, we only get 92 cents of every dollar back. And on top of that, the federal government often withholds portions of that 92-cent rebate. Not Congress, but an unelected bureaucracy within the executive branch. This year, Indiana was informed by the Obama administration, along with many other states, that because we did not have some specific obscure rule in our laws dealing with community service for drunk driving, that they were going to withhold $40 million of our gas tax money. Now, first and foremost, criminal laws such as drunk driving are the exclusive province of the states, not the federal government. Second, under what authority does the federal government have the right to dictate to us what number of days a drunk driver will have to do community service?
None.
For the record, by the way, the first state to require community service for its drunk driving laws was Indiana. The federal government picked up the idea and said, what a great idea. And then they decided that our number wasn't sufficient anymore, that they knew better. Instead of 240 days, it had to be 300 days, et cetera. That's how silly this was. But that's what an overreaching federal government will do. Under the 10th Amendment, they have absolutely no right to do that. But the Supreme Court has routinely allowed this violation of states' rights under the concept that the Constitution grants the federal government taxing authority, and it can therefore withhold the money as it sees fit. Basically, the federal government can get around its constitutional limits by blackmailing the states over tax money and making them do its bidding, which has been going on for quite a long time. This is the key reason, in my opinion, why we need to amend the Constitution, to reestablish the limits of federal power and reassert the power of the states just as the Founding Fathers intended. There's a great line out there, and I will deviate from my comments here for a second, but I think it's accurate. The 50 state legislatures were intended to be the board of directors of Congress. Absolutely intended to be so. It was done through the Article 5 process and also through a process that was eliminated by the 17th Amendment, which was the right of the state legislatures to select their United States senators. Now, on first blush, you say, that's really, why would we do that? I mean, a bunch of privileged landholders were the people that got to vote in the past. Not everybody got to vote. Certainly women didn't get to vote. Why not make it a popular election? But this was a key concept the founders had. This was put into place through a constitutional amendment during Woodrow Wilson's tenure, along with the income tax and the Federal Reserve and a few other things today that do hound our country a little bit. But they forgot the reason they put it in the Constitution, because this was the way that the states could make Congress pay attention to the states' issues. If a United States senator knew that their job depended on being selected by the state legislature, they're going to listen to the state legislature when we say, don't do that. That's hurting your state. That's not the province of the federal government. Do not vote for that, sir or madam. We gave that up in the 17th Amendment. That was the other key tool to control the federal government. It bears hearing that as we go forward in this discussion nationally about whether to do an Article 5 convention. The other critical reason besides the complete elimination of state power is this: Washington is broken. That comes as no news to people here, but it bears saying over and over again. It has a partisan bent that is unprecedented but understandable due to the times we are facing. We continue down a road of uncontrollable spending with no fix in sight unless the Senate goes Republican and the presidency quickly follows. And I would not hold my breath on that, my friends, because we have shown, my party, capable of nominating people who cannot stand up under the spotlight and probably aren't prepared to do the job. The Republicans should hold Senate seats in Nevada, Delaware, Missouri, South Dakota, and Indiana today. Unfortunately, we don't. And as a result, the Democrats are in power in the Senate And Harry Reid is the leader of the Senate, perhaps the most incompetent man ever to lead the United States Senate in the history of our nation. And that may be being kind, okay? Horrible. So what do we do? Here's kind of the key point here. What do? Do we throw up our hands and say, we did what we could? Do we give up and say, what could we do? I don't think this group believes that. I certainly don't. Future generations are absolutely counting on our generation to figure out some way to fix the overwhelming federal debt and avoid the inevitable tax increases that are coming as a result of that threaten to cripple our economy, our way of life, and most importantly, for the next generation, our nation's future prosperity. In my opinion, if we sit on our haunches, then we deserve the scorn of the next generation, including my children and your grandchildren, because we will have let them down, and I believe that is unforgivable. Last night I was down in Indianapolis at the state Republican dinner, and I got to hear Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal speak. Still only 42 years old, really a brilliant guy. I got to talk with him, which was kind of a thrill. He is smart. At 24 years of age, he ran the entire Department of Health for the state of Louisiana. And since I have a 26-year-old, and I'm still wondering where he's headed a little bit at times, that was something. But he said something that I thought was profound and on point with what I just said. He said, each generation of Americans renews the American dream of opportunity and freedom. We cannot be the first generation to mortgage the future of our children. And that is what we're looking at if we don't do something. If we don't have the courage to stand up and say we need to do something about this, something constitutional, something legal, but something that can change the course of this country. So here in Indiana, we decided to do something about this situation. This past session, we passed Senate Bills 224 and 225. And as you might guess, each of these bills has something to do with the Constitution. Well, a convention of the states to amend the Constitution. For the record, I was the author of both of them. The Speaker of the House was the sponsor in the House. And since the tradition in the Senate is that the President pro tem does not carry legislation, you know that this was very important to me and to my caucus. We decided, though, knowing the history of this whole discussion on Article 5, that you cannot have a convention of the states unless you first put some strong controls and limits on the delegates to ensure there will be no runaway convention. Now, Senate Bill 225 explains how to choose delegates, and essentially, in a nutshell, it limits the number of delegates to 2, each with an alternate. It's our hope that this will become a national model. Other states have the Indiana model right now and are talking about it. We have spread these bills around the country and continue to do so. This, or something very close to it, I think will be in many of the states within the next year. It's very important that you limit your delegates. It's very important that each state only have one vote, by the way, in these conventions. Nobody's going to a convention from the Midwest of California and New York are going to dominate it. I won't. But these conventions, and historically, that were happened before the Constitution was written, one vote per county or one vote per state. And that's how it worked. You can have 10 people coming, but you only get one vote. So, basically, let me tell you how it works. To be a delegate, you cannot be a federal employee. This is the Indiana rules. You cannot be a member of Congress. Very important. This is a state-driven process. Nobody from Washington is getting in, okay? You must be a registered voter. You must take an oath to faithfully follow the express directions of the state legislature. Very important. Senate Bill 224 is the more substantial bill. It sets in place how to control your delegate so there can be no straying from the agenda provided to that delegate by the state legislature, and thus no chance for a runaway convention. The selection process is thorough so there won't be someone upon which the state cannot count on to follow their instructions and honor their oath. That type of person will be critical and will be selected, I assure you. More importantly, should there be any question about whether or not that delegate is following their instructions to the letter, they have a panel that they can turn to in Indiana. The Chief Justice of the Indiana Supreme Court, the Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, and the Attorney General of Indiana will sit in a panel and let that delegate know if they believe that they have strayed from their charge. But if that delegate does stray, the inconceivable happens and they say, now that I'm here, I'm doing what I want, and I don't care what anybody told me to do. That delegate will be immediately pulled back to Indiana and replaced by their alternate. If the incredible happens and all four, the two delegates and their two alternates, don't follow their rules, we pull out of the convention entirely as a state, which probably shoots the whole thing down. And by the way, any delegate who strays from their directive is going to be charged with a Class D felony in Indiana. Think about that. That's pretty tough stuff. On top of all of that, remember this too. For those who are skeptical still that you could still have a runaway convention, 38 states must ratify whatever comes out of that convention. If those states are saying, you have two things you can vote on and two things only, which is likely, because we're all talking, by the way, about this, and we're all going to have a similar approach going into a convention. If 3/4 of the states have to ratify this, they're not ratifying anything that went beyond what their express instructions of their delegates were going to be. So these concepts are critically important to start out with, to be able to refute the argument that you couldn't control a convention. Our founding fathers certainly thought we could. They gave us credit for figuring out a way to do it. Now, again, I said these are being passed around the country by various groups interested in the potential of a convention of the states. These groups are fiscally conservative people. They're not all Republicans. They can be libertarians. There's a few Democrats who think states' rights are important too. Anyone is welcome. Most of them support a balanced budget amendment. That is one that's going outside of the Article 5 convention as we speak. And some other amendment which would clip the wings of Congress's taxing authority. I come back to that concept, the taxing authority. That would force the federal government more than anything else to stop its reckless spending and to live within its means. Does anybody think that's going to happen in Washington if something is imposed upon the Congress to force it to live within its means? I certainly don't.
Term limits.
Well, I've talked to you a little bit tonight about a cutting-edge effort. Its fate's uncertain. Its story is obviously yet to be told, but it is happening. Its goal is to rectify what troubles everybody in this room, the uncertain future that our nation faces because of irresponsible leadership in Washington that simply cannot, for a variety of reasons, get its fiscal act together. We all know this mountain of debt is unsustainable. Its outcome is certain disaster for our country, and our nation, as we know it, is in danger of being buried by it. Remember this always. I love this line. A government that is big enough to give you everything is also big enough to take away everything. And it's worth writing down and putting up on the wall. That's the direction we're headed if we don't stop this runaway federal spending. The states have it within their power to do something about this. They've never done it before. I think for the first time, the times are ripe for getting something done as we realize what we're really facing and the inevitability of terrible consequences if we just sit back and say, what could we do? I think Indiana can lead the way on this. I, for one, am betting we can. I believe there's a path to reverse this disastrous course that the Obama administration has set us on. And I guess to those who would still say you can't have a convention, a constitutional convention, that it can't work, I ask, if not now, when? I mean, I'd rather be concerned about and work through the issues of a runaway convention than to allow this runaway debt to occur any longer in this country. We got to do something. When have we ever been a nation that refused to try? Just saying you just can't do it. It's just not possible. We're a can-do country. We still are, if given opportunities in this country. It's the greatest country on earth. We can do things in this country, and we can do this, believe me. There's a growing movement toward an Article 5 convention. Mark Levin's recent book, The Liberty Amendments, and I'm sure some of you have read it. For those of you who haven't, it's a very thoughtful book, actually. It has a great amount of history in it that's worth reading. It gives you a sense of how the language of the Constitution was constructed, why certain things were so important to the founders, and why they're in there, such as the Article 5, such as the right for the state legislatures to select their senators, why it was so meaningful. And it's helped move this concept forward in a way that word of mouth really never could. And I'm very grateful to Mr. Levin for writing the book. I hope you get it. I hope you read it. I think it's worthy of your time. Next week, I'm going to travel to George Washington's home in Mount Vernon, Virginia. So is Representative Small's, by the way. We are meeting out there with legislators from 30 other states to discuss how we can put together an Article 5 convention of the states for the purpose of amending the United States Constitution. There are going to be 100 of us there. It is the start of something bigger. We're going to start putting the outline for how you put the rules together for a convention. Because one thing that's true is that the states, 34 states have to petition Congress. We're going to make sure that when we petition Congress, the structure for this convention is set in stone, and we will run that convention. But if you don't have your homework done ahead of time, there's no telling the mischief that people in Congress could do, as we know.
We're counting on you.
Well, I'm telling you, it's a very exciting thing we're doing. There's a lot of good people. We have a conference call tomorrow. There's about 7 of us that talk regularly. The guy who came up with the guy to Mount Vernon is a guy named Chris Kappinga. And I haven't even met these people. I looked up their faces online. There's a group, gray hairs and young, brown hairs, and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and Senate presidents and speakers of the House around the nation, and a lot of them are coming to this meeting. It's very exciting. It's very interesting. It's the first of its kind in a couple hundred years, I think, and it's about time. So we're not going to give up. We're going to do something new and different here in this country starting next week in Washington, D.C., in Mount Vernon, not in the Capitol. We're meeting outside. And I'm very excited about it. I hope you pay attention to it. It has a lot of potential, and we're going to give it our best shot. So God bless all of you, and thanks for listening tonight.